Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our WatchGuard webinar, Security for Here or To Go. My name is Christine Ramsdell, Marketing Specialist here at WatchGuard Technologies. I'm also joined here by Ben Oster, Senior Product Manager. But before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The first is that the audio streamed through your computer only, so there is no dial-in. Second, all the widgets on your menu are resizable and movable. Third, there is a Q&A box in your widget menu, and all questions will be answered at the end, but at any time, please feel free to put in your questions. The on-demand recording of this webinar will be available as the same live link. Lastly, we do offer CPE credit for all our webinars. In this case, this webinar is for 30 minutes, which is worth half a credit. Please check in with your certification body for more details. Without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Ben to begin. Ben?
Okay. Great. Thank you, Christine. So again, my name is Ben Oster. I'm a Senior Product Manager here at WatchGuard, managing kind of our endpoint strategy and some of our cloud posture and how we're going to move that forward. And a lot of that has to do with the way we work now. We are constantly evolving the way we access data, the way our users access data, the applications we're using to access that data. And because of that, we need to come together and figure out kind of new strategies for how to approach that. So the why are we here of today is really how are we going to address the new security challenges of this new and mobile workforce, or maybe more mobile workforce. I think we've been saying that for a while. It's hard to still call it new, but as we see cloud adoption continue to expand, I think we're becoming more and more mobile. I want to talk a little bit about defending yourself against phishing and malware in this mobile world. I think that's really important with all of the BYOD we see in the wild today, bringing devices that employees belong behind the perimeter or into your data systems or into your cloud. Constantly evolve that threat landscape. So that ever-evolving look at the landscape is important here. And then it wouldn't be a complete webinar without at least a little bit of our pitch at the end, but I'll keep that minimal. I want to talk to you mostly today about how we kind of view the world in this new and expanding experience that we have today. So again, we're talking about how we're evolving this workforce and how this experience of our users is ever shifting in a more modern experience of cloud across really all markets, right? It doesn't matter if you're SMB, mid-market, high enterprise. We're really experiencing a huge amount of growth in a cloud space, and we have to figure out how to protect that. 70% of employees are now working remotely 1 day a week. I thought that was a really interesting statistic when I read it on the CNBC article. But if we're talking about 70% of employees that would normally come behind your perimeter and behind your walls, it used to be much easier to protect them. Not to mention that threats are becoming more and more complicated to start, but we used to have control over where they were, how they were accessing the data, where they were accessing the data. All of these things really drove us to build walls around our data, and we can think of those as the physical walls in our buildings, right? If you think about just your house, right? We're sitting in our house, we have walls around our house or our apartment or wherever we live, and we lock doors. We make those buildings secure. We do that with our businesses as well. We secure our doors. I have to badge in every door that I walk through in my office here to make sure that we're controlling the flow of people, not just the flow of information. But as we've expanded out to using these new systems, even if it's just, say, hosted email, right? Even if you're just using Exchange Online, you've taken something that used to be inside of that building, behind those badged access, behind those locked doors, and you've put it in somebody else's building, and you've trusted that your neighbor locks their door, right? So it's really important to think about not only how we're transferring that data out, but how people are accessing it. And if we're starting to see 70% of our employees work remotely one day a week, as a baseline, we can only imagine that that's going to continue to grow. It's becoming easier and easier and easier to get to this data beyond your four walls. So we really need to expand our understanding of what those four walls look like. Those four walls now aren't a building that we've built around somebody. It's a bubble that we put around our users. I like to joke that you're at the park. If you've ever been at a park and you see somebody blowing those big bubbles with the rope strands, that's what we're doing, right? When your user walks through their door to leave your building with a phone or a device that can connect back to a cloud data store, it's important to remember that you need to be there with your big bubble machine putting a bubble over that person so that they can take that protection with them. It's important to approach this from a everywhere your users go, your perimeter must follow, because they are your new perimeter. So it's important to remember that these security challenges are going to follow your workforce. Right? I don't care if it's something as simple as malware protection that goes everywhere. We've been doing this for a long time, right? We've had kind of a traditional experience of antivirus out on the endpoint, whether it's a Windows machine, Mac machine, even your cell phones have some amount of malware protection on them, either natively from the operating system or as a third-party tool. We take this malware protection, this base level, a baseline of protection that we're comfortable providing, that's inobtrusive, that people are comfortable and used to, with our users everywhere they go. We also have to look at that from a next-gen perspective, right? We used to rely on on the older models of antivirus and signature-based protection. But as the threats evolve, they're becoming aware of those things. This isn't news, right? I think that most everyone on this webinar has heard this already, right? We know that the threats are evolving. We know that they're looking at things that no longer are protecting our users. We know they can bypass signatures. We know it's a new threat because we don't have a signature for it yet. And we have to evolve with those things. So these next generation protection tools that you can get to kind of do that evolution, heuristic analysis of your executables, looking at things on the endpoint or on your systems from a how is it behaving perspective, rather than a do I know what it is, because you're never going to know what everything is. So we have to look at how things are behaving, how they're interacting with the rest of our system, what they're asking of our users. These are all important pieces of protecting a more mobile workforce. We have to talk about zero-day and advanced malware and advanced persistent threats everywhere we go, right? This is core to this message today, if you haven't noticed, is that we're talking about mobile users, and that protection has to move wherever they go, whether it's Starbucks, whether it's their house, whether it's a hotel, whether it's an airport. Literally, we have Wi-Fi on the planes, and people are talking about it being free in the next couple of years, so we won't even have to pay for it up in the sky. Everywhere you go, your users are at risk, and the more important your data is, the more important it is to have these zero-day protections in place, because the evolution of malware and the evolution of the threat landscape continues to make it more and more difficult for us to not only protect the walls that we used to protect or the walls that other people protect for us, but the walls we need to build around those mobile users. I think this is part and parcel of that, where we want to talk about ransomware being ubiquitous from a protection standpoint. I should probably say that in a more concise way, but we need to make sure that ransomware protection is ubiquitous across our platforms. We don't need something to protect a Windows machine, but not something that's protecting our Mac. We don't need something that protects our server, but allows our phones to be exposed to a threat. These are solutions that have to protect us across all of our devices, across all of our users, and across all of our locations. I think key to that is multi-factor authentication being crucial to the future of protecting our content. We'll talk about users in a little bit here, but they really are the approach that everyone takes to get in. There are big attacks that you hear about, nation-state attacks. You hear about direct attacks on internet service providers or DNS providers. I think a couple days ago there was a Cloudflare outage that took down the Cloudflare resolvers and took down a ton of websites. It's very clear that these threats are everywhere. And while those attacks can come directly at you, and while they can come directly at a nation-state or from a nation-state, I think it's important to remember that about 90 to 95%, depending on who you're talking to, of these threats come from bad password management, user mismanagement, bad credentials, storing things in the wrong place. Right? We talk about all these tools we have in place, next-gen antivirus, host ransomware protection, advanced persistent threat protection, and we don't talk about the fact that John over in finance has password 123, and when you make him change your password every day, it's password 1234 or 2234. Right? He's doing simple things to iterate on something that's making it harder and harder for him to remember what he's doing and not disrupt his work, which is key, and also making it easier and easier for you to become vulnerable from password reuse, from simple passwords, from basic security problems that we see everywhere. Multi-factor authentication gives us the ability to protect against that. Some of the new NIST standards on password protection no longer include complexity. They no longer include password resets every 90 days. They want tokenized multi-factor authentication, and you can get rid of those things. They want you to have a long password. It could be a sentence. It could be a word. They don't care how complex it is. And as long as you have a long password and you use tokenized multi-factor authentication, you can meet the NIST recommendations for password protection. These are recommendations. They're not the current NIST standards, but those always evolve into the standards. So we can really see where these things are headed. That is the best way to protect these users. From there, we have to kind of talk about how these threats and how these experiences are being centrally correlated. I have users with phones, I have users with laptops, I have data servers, I have networks, and I need to make sure that in all of those things, I'm regularly pulling that data into my systems and understanding what's happening. We can't take random events and random content and hope to protect all these different pieces. We have to look at things holistically. We have to look across our environments. I think it's even better if you can work with vendors like WatchGuard, but we're not alone here, that actually correlate data across those different layers. It's not just what's happening in my environment, it's what's happening at another WatchGuard customer. It's what's happening at another Cisco customer. Taking that data, correlating the intelligence centrally, and creating this actionable visibility across your environment is very important to the workforce, the mobile workforce challenges we see today. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about that history, but what does that what does that threat landscape look like? That apparently is a mouthful. So we talked also about what that can look like, how those attacks can come into your environment, what some of those threats really are. But if we talk about this as phishing, spear phishing, social media spoofing, we talk about watering hole attacks, fake social identities, 2FA credential theft. These are all different ways that we see threats coming into our environment. And I mentioned it previously, but the weak link is always your users, right? Always is, every time I say always, I feel like I need to caveat that, where you could have a system that's not properly secured. But the reality of our day-to-day is that securing our environment starts with securing those users. Whether that's protecting them against new phishing threats, using new threat intelligence and new tools, whether that's protecting them against targeted phishing attacks, educating them on the content that they might encounter in the wild, looking at everything in their environment, everything that they can encounter, and bringing that together so that they've seen it before it happens is a great baseline for your people. It doesn't mean that it's going to solve your problem, because they still are those weak links, weak passwords, reused passwords, If you go to, Spy Cloud or Have I Been Pwned and type in your personal email, I can almost assure you that every single person on this call has an email that they own that has been part of a breach at some point. I've been part of basically every single major North American breach in the last 10 years. Almost every single one. Not Ashley Madison, but almost every single one. I said that last time, and I immediately got that joke from the audience, so I headed you off at the pass there. But it is important to remember that that is where we start. We start with that user protection. We start with that education, because they're the ones that are going out into the wild and dealing with the problems that we're seeing. They're the ones that are bringing the risk back to your organization. 2FA credential theft is really an interesting one on here, and I always like to highlight this because I do spend time talking about tokenized multi-factor being important. 2FA credential theft is definitely a thing. Callback numbers and text messages are no longer considered secure. They can be emulated, they can be spoofed, so it's important to understand that when we talk about multi-factor authentication, we are talking about tokenized multi-factor authentication, whether that's hardware or software tokens. It is more secure than just a standard text message or a phone call. But again, all of this comes from how secure are your users. So I think that one of the ways that I like to think about this is a hospital, right? If we're talking about patient zero during an outbreak or a sickness or anything that we're seeing out in the human world, we can kind of relate that back to our security posture and our security standing inside of our company. So when your users go out without protection, they can bring that threat back to you. I take my cell phone out to Starbucks and I type in my email password on somebody's hacked Wi-Fi, right? There's an evil twin network, and they are reading my keystrokes. It's hugely important to understand that that user, whether they come back behind your perimeter or not, has effectively brought that threat behind your walls. Those threats come with those users, whether they bring it in or not. They can bring a laptop that has a piece of malware on it that will self-propagate across your networks. And with the right tools in place inside of your perimeter, you can help to protect against this. But bringing that threat through your door and letting that threat through your quarantined area becomes very dangerous to the whole hospital. So that risk now shares across all of the users in your environment. And that could be all of the data in your environment, right? We don't have to even think about this as users or systems or a piece of hardware. We can look at this from a content perspective, right? If I have a user, let's take John for accounting, who I used earlier. If I have a user, John from accounting, who used his phone at Starbucks to type in his email address, and he typed in his corporate network password on an evil twin network, that has now shared that threat to content across your organization, your accounting documentation. They now have these threat and bad actors now have a way into your environment, whether it was from a user coming through your door or not. So we've shared this risk to other people in accounting. We've shared this risk to other people who produce content stored in those accounting file shares. We can really think about this as a user, service, hardware, content threat. Anytime we let someone go out into the wild without protection, we risk opening up the rest of our content to them. And we create this exponentially worse problem in your environment. I now have everyone that can access content in a SharePoint drive or accounting SharePoint drive. A bad actor could pull that data down. You could have someone in your environment that unintentionally changes a permission on that drive, and now everyone in the organization can see that content. And while John in accounting didn't mean anything from it and isn't misusing your data, Tim in IT might be mad that somebody else makes more money than him, and he saw that because the permission was set incorrectly. So it's important to understand that now there is a reason for that person to effectively become a bad actor, or even worse than that, we've just exposed the data to an intentional external bad actor. So it is really important to think about this from a holistic perspective. Talk about that user coming back to your environment as that weak link that's really exposing you to everything. So I like to think of this as kind of a game, though not always fun in games. But how do we do this move and counter move? Chess is a great example of this, right? Well, layering your security services is the perfect place to start, right? We talk about a traditional gateway antivirus earlier, and we layer that with intelligent antivirus on top of that. We talk about advanced persistent threats, doing sandboxing or looking for zero-day malware, but we need to make sure that we're also looking at the files that are on your machines, the executables that are on your devices, and how they're operating. Layering those security services together is huge in this. Ensuring that your protection travels with your users. I, again, don't care if it's downstairs to Starbucks and they check on their phone in the basement of your building, or someone who travels 180,000 miles a year and never is in the office, or even just somebody who works remotely and sits in their home office every single day. We have to make sure that the same tools that we're using to protect our most sensitive data behind our traditional perimeters are still protecting those users wherever they happen to go. I think it's also important to approach each attack vector with simplicity in mind. The more complex our tools, the more they impact our users, the more our users try and circumnavigate them and avoid using tools that allow visibility into what they're doing, the more you end up in an environment where you have shadow IT happening, and now you have to put a new tool in to protect against that. So taking a simple approach to whether it's unifying your vendors so that there's only one agent running on their endpoint, whether it's unifying the experience they have in the cloud because we have centralized policy management across all these tools. Simplifying the way we're enforcing these rules is hugely important. I would say that make sure you're working with your vendors also to solve multiple problems. I don't know anybody who's ever said, yes, I have 15 problems and I would like to buy from 15 different people to solve them. I'm not suggesting that one vendor can solve absolutely every single thing you're ever going to encounter. But I can tell you that there are a number of vendors out there like us who've done a good job looking at a holistic landscape and saying, okay, we can cover this much of that, and getting you across a bunch of these solutions. If you have 15 problems and you only need 3 vendors, that's a whole lot better than 15. So make sure you're working with your vendors to kind of solve as many problems as that vendor can without constantly shuffling what you're doing. And then I would always remind you to keep in mind the long game. These threats change. You're never going to be done because the people trying to get to your content are never done. So keep in mind that this is not a one-time solution that you're going to put in place. You will need to continue to evolve your coverage, and I think it's, again, important to find vendors that are continually evolving theirs so that you can move with them. So again, the future of the workforce is really the core of this message, right? And what we're talking about is how much of this traffic we see. This is another quote that I found interesting. By 2021, 27% of network traffic for the average company is going to bypass the network perimeter entirely. That doesn't even mean traffic that we aren't inspecting, right? That's all traffic, period. We won't have visibility into nearly 30% of our traffic in the next 2 years. That's huge. I also found in here that it was interesting that millennials are working remotely to the maximum extent of their company policy. So generally, as our workforce has become younger, their concept of work-life balance has shifted from I want to work between this hour and then turn that off. A newer work-life balance is I want to work when I can and when I feel like it, as long as I'm getting my job done. Right, and that falls into this rise of co-working and destination co-working and ever more appealing. It's an ever more appealing experience to younger generations. I'm seeing ads in my Facebook and in my Instagram that say, hey, would you like to work in, Bora Bora for a week? We've got an apartment that you can rent and sit on the beach and work remotely with high-speed internet. And it's a new and different experience that allows our mobile workforces to be anywhere using services provided by someone we don't know. So we have to make sure that we're protecting them wherever they are and ensuring that our data is safe. And then I think continued advancements in conferencing are going to continue to make this easier. Working remotely is going to become easier and easier. I remember when we first started talking about telecommuting, and I'm going to age myself a little bit here, in the 90s, right? And everyone said, oh, we're going to work remotely now, and it didn't work because we weren't ready for it. And so it took us a long time to recover from that. But we are at the point where you don't have to be in an office. I can get on a video call with you anywhere in the world on a mobile network. It's incredible how quickly these things are evolving, and I think it's really important to remember that they will continue to evolve, and we're going to see less and less of this traffic and these threats behind our traditional tools. We have to expand and take those with them. Like I said, I promised you a little bit of a pitch, so how can we help you? Well, we have simple and affordable tokenized multi-factor authentication for everyone. We offer on and off network protection and education, so you can actively educate your users when there is a threat detected. I think that's a huge piece, that ability to educate on the fly, to educate in the teachable moment is huge. We offer detection, response, and visibility everywhere. So on your mobile clients, on your laptops, behind your firewalls, we can correlate that data across all of those services and help you with your visibility into that. We also offer some really, really great industry-leading secure Wi-Fi solutions so that you can shut down those evil twin networks that you're seeing in your building from the Starbucks that's downstairs, without having to worry about, are you affecting their network, and are your users on a bad network? And we really have worked to make this total security message very simple. We've consolidated all these tools into one, so you can look at single SKU shopping and solve these problems across your entire environment with a single solution. So that's what I have today. I think we have a few minutes left for questions, so I think we'll go ahead and open that up now. I'm sure we'll have some in the chat boxes that I've tried to answer as we've gone along, and then any new questions we have right now, I'm happy to answer.
All right, so we're doing questions right now. Thank you, everybody, to Ben and all the attendees on this webinar. If you have any questions, we're answering them now, so go ahead and put them in the box. The first thing here, Ben, we have the question here is, can AuthPoint tell admins if a device is using an outdated web browser or doesn't have antivirus protection installed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, AuthPoint does not have that risk mitigation capabilities in it. For those who aren't sure, AuthPoint is our multi-factor tokenized authentication platform. So we are actively working to add a lot of those risk factors into AuthPoint. We have a bunch of those rolling out later in the quarter. From is antivirus installed, that's a little bit more involved than what AuthPoint is planning to do. But we do have roadmap at WatchGuard as well to manage some of what your endpoint looks like before you can connect to the environment pieces of the puzzle. So yes, we do have most of that functionality coming, but it is not there right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben, for that. And another question here is, I know you mentioned earlier, but what was the name of the program that can check your email?
Yes, so there are, I think I mentioned two. Have I Been Pwned, PWNED, is kind of the classic go-to. It's a text box on a website. You type it in and it shows where you've been breached. I actually know the guys over at SpyCloud. SpyCloud is a commercial service. They sell it as a service for you to consume, but they also have a free consumer version. It's just Spy and Cloud, all one word. And they'll actually do consumer-level monitoring for you for free and show you where your password has been breached. But they go a little further and will actually show you if your password's in plain text, if it's salted, how that breach actually appears. So it's a really, really cool site.
Thank you, Ben. And another question here. So what about competitors? If I were to replace my competitor MFA solution with AuthPoint, for example, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's if you're actually looking to replace something like Duo with AuthPoint, it's a pretty straightforward thing. What we would want to do is is just talk with one of our service engineers or sales engineers and make sure that all of the applications you're using with your your existing two-factor or multi-factor solution are compatible with ours. They're all standard for the most part. Almost the vast majority of them use some sort of Radius or SAML integration. So it's really a matter of turning on AuthPoint with WatchGuard, setting up those applications, doing a little bit of a test run to make sure that everything is working, and then kind of flipping the switch. You will have to roll out and deploy a new authentication app instead of the competitive app to your workforce, but that's as simple as downloading a link from an app store. So it's a really quick and painless process. When we went through the same thing here at WatchGuard, I found the experience to be very smooth. When we rolled out ours, we retired our older Okta platform and replaced it entirely with our own AuthPoint platform.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. And I think we have time for one more question here. So if, for example, we have Total Security Suite, how can we integrate the 3 new features onto our current license?
Sure. So Total Security Suite is the way, for those who aren't aware, Total Security Suite is the way that we bundle our network services. It's our premier network security package that comes with part of our, our network firewalls and our network protection suite. So most of what we're talking about is going to be off network. So it's not going to be bundled with our Total Security Suite. That is, again, a network security suite. So what we would want to do is talk about what problems you want to solve and talk about how we can incorporate our new off-network products into your portfolio and into your security base so that we can protect your users wherever they are. But it's not going to be part of Total Security Suite.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. All right, so it looks like we have a few more questions. We will follow up via email, so you should receive that in your inbox. But once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. You can definitely watch the re-recording 30 minutes after this webinar ends, same link. And we'll catch you next time on our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Bye.